In the last episode, we talked about how organisms emit light. Ultraweak photon emission, often called biophotons. And near the end of the video, we touched on animal research that looks at what happens to photon emission when life ends. Now, the conclusion itself is not shocking. When an organism dies, the light stops being produced. Nothing radical there. But it did to me what science always does. It made me more curious. Have people ever reported seeing anything like light at the moment of death? So I went looking, not in journals this time, but in places where people describe what they saw when they were there. Online forums, Reddit threads, and the like. As I read, certain patterns kept appearing. They weren't identical stories, but they all had familiar shapes and patterns that reoccur often enough that they're difficult to ignore. Something that cannot be proven with scientific certainty, I get, but seemingly an undeniable part of the human experience. So in this video, I want to explore the patterns that emerged because whether this is related to biophotons or not, it is a strangely consistent window into what some people say they experienced in the final moments. The first pattern I noticed, partially because there were so many accounts, is what people most often describe as orbs, luminous balls of light. These reports speak of small points of light appearing near the body at or around the moment of death. White, golden, sometimes blue, always gentle, always brief. One person wrote about sitting in a hospital room with their father and noticing a small golden orb near the bed shortly before he died. It wasn't bright enough to light the room itself. It didn't announce itself either. It just appeared, drifted slowly toward a window, and then disappeared as he took his last breath. In another account, a hospice nurse described seeing a bright, white, round light appear just above a patient's head before death. Similar in appearance as the other, there was no fear, just awe. What I liked about this account is that another nurse was in the room and noticed it too. Now, at the time, no words were spoken. They just experienced it. But later, they had identical accounts. Other people describe similar moments with parents, grandparents. They see a small light near the head or chest, a point of brightness that intensifies briefly, a glow that hovers, then lifts. Sometimes the movement is upward. Sometimes it simply fades. And then there are accounts involving animals. One person described holding their dog during its final hours and noticing a blue orb-shaped light nearby. It appeared quietly. It stayed while they held their companion, and after the dog passed, it was gone. Now, across these accounts, what stands out is how little people try to force their experience. They don't seem to embellish. They don't build stories around it. They simply describe what they saw, often with their own kind of uncertainty, not claiming fact, but also not fiction. The second pattern feels different. These accounts share about a light that is not a separate object, but something bound up or connected with the person who is dying. There is a brightness, a glow, a subtle change in how the passing appears. Several people wrote about loved ones becoming calm and lucid shortly before death, and where they themselves comment on light. They typically use simple phrases. It's bright, it's beautiful, often spoken softly, often without explanation, and then silence. Others describe seeing a gentle glow around the face of the soon-to-be deceased. Not a flash, not a light turning on, more like the person seemed momentarily illuminated in a way that didn't come from any other source. One person described looking into their grandmother's eyes in the hours before she passed, and she noticed a faint blue white light around both of them, not strong, just present enough to be noticed. There are many descriptions of warmth in these accounts, a golden quality, a calming shift brought by the light. The glow, it comes quietly. It lingers just long enough to be noticed, and then it recedes. Again, what's striking is how consistent people were in their writing. They write ordinary words like bright, warm, peaceful. It was all so simple and sweet. A third pattern showed up less often, but it's distinct. These are reports of changes in the environment around the moment of death, not clearly tied to the body, but to the space itself. Some people describe a room suddenly filling with a bright light for a few seconds. Others mention flashes or beams that don't seem to come from anywhere in particular. One person wrote about seeing a bright beam of light stretching across the ceiling, only to learn immediately after that her father had passed. Another described a room becoming unusually bright for a brief moment, then returning to normal, leaving behind a lingering sense that something had shifted, and in fact, it had. Sure, you could say accounts, testimonials, they're easy to brush aside. Light changes, fatigue happens. Yeah, that could be some of the stories. Yet people, they remember them. It made a difference for them, and they share their stories not wanting anything in return. There's one more group that I want to share. A small number of people describe something like illuminated smoke or mist appearing at the moment of death. These accounts almost always come from people who are very close, often holding the hand of the person who is leaving. One person described seeing a smoke-like form rise from the top of a loved one's head, faintly glowing, lasting only a few seconds, and then disappearing. Another described a mist a few inches tall that appeared immediately after the last breath and then vanished. These reports were more rare, at least from what I found. And the people who share them, they often sound surprised themselves, not sure how to explain what they witnessed. Across all of these patterns, what stayed with me is not how extraordinary the experiences sound, because they do. It was how consistently they were described. People notice points of light, changes in brightness, brief illuminations in the room. They remember them not because they were dramatic, but because of when they occurred. These accounts sit quietly alongside what we already know to be true, that living systems emit light during life, that this emission changes as systems organize and break down, and at death, the light ends. I wanted to know whether people ever noticed light when someone was dying. They have.